Also, we have with us Aaron Matei, award-winning journalist for doing his meticulous work on Russiagate and his work in The Nation. It's Aaron Matei. Did I say it right? I never know how to say it.
I don't care.
Aaron Matei, Matey.
Depends on the week, man.
That's right.
He just lets it happen.
You do you.
We're going to talk about today the whole thing going on with Trump and Ukraine and Biden. And of course, just like with Russiagate, the Democrats are finding a bullshit issue to distract everybody from the stuff they should be screaming about, but they're not screaming about the stuff they're supposed to be screaming about or opposing Trump on the stuff they're supposed to be opposing him on. Why? Because they agree with him. Like what? Like how about his policy sending troops to Saudi Arabia? Right now, Trump is sending troops to Saudi Arabia. No one's asking, why are you doing that? Didn't we just sell them $110 billion worth of weapons? Why, first of all, why do we give a shit? Don't we have more energy than we know what to do with now? Aren't we exporting energy now to the United States? Why do we care? Oh, and here's what I said. I'm offering $1 million to the first corporate newsreader to mention the petrodollar while reporting that we are sending American troops to protect Saudi oil. Now, if you know why we're doing that, why are we in bed with Saudi Arabia? It's because when we went off the gold standard, they promised to make everybody, when they bought their oil, do it in American dollars, which is called the petrodollar, which props up our economy and keeps our interest rate low. So if we ever go off the petrodollar, that's going to be bad for our economy. And so that's why we're in bed with, that's one of the big reasons why we're in bed with Saudi Arabia, why we're doing Yemen with them. We're committing a genocide. We're helping a dictator, a theocratic, oppressive, murderous dictatorship commit a genocide in Yemen. We're doing that right now. That's the real scandal that no one will talk about. What are they talking about? He asked somebody to look into the corruption of Joe Biden's kid, who is corrupt. That's it. Right now, did I get it right, Aaron? I'm here with Aaron Matei. Aaron, please tell me if I got how am I doing so far?
I totally agree. And, it's so symbolic that this is the issue that leads them to finally coalesce around impeachment, because it shows you can do anything. You can cause, as you say, Jimmy, genocide in Yemen, but you cannot go after another member of the establishment. And so Democrats and the Democratic partisans who identify with them in the media, this now is the impeachment-worthy scandal. Not committing mass murder in Yemen, not pulling out of the Iran deal and the Paris Climate Accords and locking up kids in cages and, subjecting immigrants to even more cruelty than they were under Obama, where it was already pretty cruel. No, you cannot go after Joe Biden. And this is what we're going to get you for. And it goes back, this is endemic. Richard Nixon, what was he impeached for? He wasn't impeached for mass murder and bombing in Cambodia and Laos and Vietnam. He was impeached for going after the other faction of the establishment. The Democratic Party was broken into. Nixon covered that up. He lied about it. You can't do that. You cannot go after the other faction of the elite, or else that faction plus their partisans in the media will go after you. And so that's what is unfolding now. And, in the process, the Democrats and their media partisans are enrolling everybody who is legitimately aggrieved by Trump's existence as president, but they're enrolling them in this really kind of narrow and backward grievance that it's just not going to catch on. And we can talk more about that. But so the point is, I totally agree with you that this is trying to get him on something so minuscule in the scale of his actual crimes.
And the fact that it actually involves actual corruption from Joe Biden and his family also means that half the country is not going to go along with this impeachment. In fact, we already know it's not going to go anywhere in the Senate. So this is just another political stunt because the Democrats don't have a policy position to offer to counter Donald Trump. That's why Nancy Pelosi wants the same health care Donald Trump was. She wants private health insurance, and she wants private pharmaceutical companies to charge you as much as they want. That's Nancy Pelosi's plan. That's Trump's plan. They can't oppose him on Syria. They can't oppose him on They just bombed Libya again, by the way. We just bombed Libya again. They don't oppose him on Afghanistan. They don't oppose because he's still there. They don't oppose him on Venezuela. They don't oppose him on Yemen. They don't oppose him on Saudi Arabia. They don't oppose him on any of the stuff they should be opposing him on because they go along with him with it. So if you remember, and again, here's another thing. If you're not going to impeach bona fide war criminals like George Bush and Dick Cheney. Remember, when there's bona fide war criminals, they lied us into a war. That's why the Democrats took over the House, the Senate, and we elected a black guy with a Muslim name in 2008 named Barack Obama, because they were so angry at George Bush and Dick Cheney for lying us into a war and ordering torture and being war criminals. That's how much people hated them. And they asked Nancy Pelosi, are you going to impeach a war criminal? And here's what she said.
Impeachment is off the table.
And that's a pledge.
Well, it's a pledge on the yes. I mean, it's a pledge. Of course, it is.
And does that?
It is not. It is a waste of time. No,
it is a waste of time. Well, so is this, because he's not going to be impeached, just like Bill Clinton wasn't impeached in 1999. They didn't impeach him. And what did they do? They helped him. His numbers went up as they did this, which is exactly what's going to happen to Trump, which just happened to Trump with Russiagate. And after Russiagate was all over, guess what Trump had? His highest approval ratings of his presidency. And so you don't have to be Kreskin to realize that this will also boost Trump. It'll hurt Joe Biden, and you don't care. This will help ensure Trump 2020 victory. They don't care. And why didn't she prosecute George Bush? Because she was complicit. Because she was complicit in torture. She was told that they were torturing people in 2002, and she didn't whistleblow. She didn't say anything, which makes her complicit in a war crime. So she is also a war criminal, which is why she didn't investigate or impeach George Bush, because she would have also been held account for being a war criminal. People don't know that. And I just want to remind you, if you want to impeach Trump for doing something technically illegal, well, and being corrupt, let's listen to what Dylan Ratigan has to say about it.
So, again, while the FBI director example gives those with a partisan view against Donald Trump, and it's easy to be against Donald Trump, the obvious fuel to suggest that he's a criminal who's a terrible guy, blah, 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 under investigation, probably true. But if you believe that, then you probably also need to consider that Hillary Clinton was taking money through her foundation to do weapons deals overseas while personally enriching herself, and that Barack Obama is paid off by the private health insurance companies and the banks to make sure that we don't actually have proper health care or a functioning financial system. It's hard to believe one and not accept the other two.
So, again, it is more than half the country sees this as what it is, a completely partisan propaganda bullshit to distract us from what the real problem is, that we don't have an opposition party and the Democrats don't have anything to offer people to come out and vote for them. All they have is Russiagate. All they have is impeachment, just like the Republicans had when Bill Clinton was president. That's all they have. They're a bankrupt party. They have a bankrupt ideology. Would you agree with that? I'm here with Aaron. Would you agree with what I've said so far?
I agree with everything. The only thing I'll add is that I do think that this differs from Russiagate in one respect, which is that at least this time you can look at what we know so far and argue that Trump did something inappropriate.
Yes.
Whereas with Russiagate, that was just a conspiracy theory that was baseless. It was moronic, and it was embarrassing for everyone who peddled it, as I hope they know now. But in this case, look, if you look at what's called the transcript, it's not an exact transcript. It's notes of the note takers who were listening in on the call, but it looks pretty thorough, or at least from what is there, we can see that Trump is asking the Ukrainian leader to. It's a bit vague. We don't know exactly what he's saying, but basically, he wants the Ukrainian leader to assist with some sort of investigation of Joe Biden for corruption, whether that's a U.S. investigation or it's a Ukrainian investigation. It's kind of unclear. It looks like he wants the Ukrainian leader to help with a U.S. investigation, one that actually doesn't exist, because Attorney General William Barr says that Trump never asked him to look into Joe Biden's, and that investigation is not going on. So it's a bit fuzzy. But yeah, look, given that Biden is Trump's political rival, it's inappropriate for Trump to ask a foreign leader to help with an investigation to Biden. I think most people could agree on that. Trump also asked the Ukrainian leaders help looking into the origins of Russiagate and for that investigation. And in fact, that's the first thing that Trump brings up.
So let me set it up, and then we'll get into that. So according to the New York Times, if Biden faces conflict of interest questions that are being promoted by Trump and allies. They're also being promoted by people who aren't Trump and aren't his ally. They're also being promoted by award-winning journalists. How about that? Hunter Biden, this is according to the New York Times. So this is where it all stems from. Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's youngest kid, was a Yale-educated lawyer. This is what they put in the New York Times. This is as nice as they can make it sound. He was a Yale-educated lawyer who had served on the boards of Amtrak and a number of nonprofit organizations and think tanks. I'm sure because he was a brilliant mind and not because he was the son of the vice president. So he did that, but the New York Times also admits he lacked any experience in Ukraine. And just months earlier, he had been discharged from the Navy Reserve after testing positive for cocaine. And what happens when you get a discharge from the Navy for testing positive for cocaine? You immediately get a job out of foreign countries' energy board for $50,000 a year. Why would you give a shit about your Navy Reserve? He got paid $50,000 a month for his work sitting on an energy board in the Ukraine. And that doesn't reek of corruption at all, does it? Of course it does. It's 100% corruption. And guess what? Here's what the New York Times says. Hunter Biden, who left Burisma's board last month, was one of many politically prominent Americans of both major parties who made money in the Ukraine over the last decade. Yeah, you know who one of those guys was? Paul Manafort. In several cases, most notably that of Paul Manafort, President Trump's former campaign chairman, that business came under criminal investigation that exposed a seedy side of the lucrative Western consulting industry in Ukraine. So Joe Biden, according to the New York Times, is involved in a seedy side of lucrative Western consulting industry in the Ukraine. At the very least, Joe Biden's son, the son of the vice president, is involved in the seedy side of lucrative Western consulting industry in the Ukraine. That's what the New York Times is admitting. And one of his most memorable performances, this is Joe Biden. This is also from the Times. One of his most memorable performances came on a trip to Kiev in March 2016 when he threatened to withhold, this is Joe Biden, threatened Ukraine to withhold $1 billion in United States loan guarantees if Ukraine leaders did not dismiss the country's top prosecutor. The pressure campaign worked. The prosecutor general, long a target of criticism from other Western nations and international lenders, was soon voted out by the Ukrainian parliament. Among those who had a stake in the outcome was Hunter Biden, Mr. Biden's younger son, who at the time was on the board of an energy company owned by a Ukrainian oligarch who had been in the sights of the first prosecutor general. So there's a prosecutor general in the Ukraine. He's going to investigate the seedy business dealings of Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son. And what did Joe Biden say to the president of the Ukraine? This is what he said to him.
Press conference said, no, I said, we're not going to give you the $1 billion. They said, you have no authority. You're not the president. The president said, I said, call him. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money.
That is exactly what they are accusing Trump of doing. They're accusing Trump of using United States funds to hold over the head of the president of the Ukraine to do something that Trump wants, which is to investigate Biden's kid, and his involvement. That's what they're claiming that Trump is doing. He just admitted he did it. He just admitted it, which shows you again the herd mentality of the journalism in the United States, television and in print. Because no one is reporting this. They've decided this is a non-story, so they won't report it. They only focus on Trump. This is just like what they did with the Clinton Foundation. Kyle Kalinske makes this point that the entire U.S. news media decided the Clinton Foundation, what Dylan Ratigan just pointed out was their corruption, was a non-story. And that was a conspiracy theory that Trump and Trumpers would throw at them, so they didn't investigate it. Trump beat Hillary over the head with the Clinton Foundation's corruption, and it hurt her, and it helped him become president. And he is going to take this and beat Joe Biden over his fucking head with this at every chance possible, because Joe Biden is corrupt, and so is his kid. And everybody's going to know it who's going to vote for Trump, because he's going to tell everybody. And Joe Biden is going to wither like an old man with early onset dementia that he is. So here it gets brought up by Ted Lieu. Ted Lieu was the number one Russiagator, the number one propaganda. Instead of putting up a platform to beat Trump, they do all this garbage. He's asked about this today. Watch this.
And I also do want to get your take, though. The underlying problem here was, of course, Hunter Biden receiving $50,000 a month from a Ukrainian energy company. Do you think that is evidence of corrupt behavior?
No, people sit on boards and they get monetary payments. And what the evidence actually shows is that Ukrainians looked into this, terminated the investigation, found nothing there. So this is just made up, which also is very troubling, because you have the American president essentially asking Ukrainians to manufacture dirt on a political opponent because there really was no evidence of corruption.
Here's what Kyle Kalinske says to that. He tweets out that video and he says, imagine what he would say if Ivanka was getting $50,000 a month from a Russian company. Imagine what Ted Lieu would say. So do you understand that half the country sees this in a very different way than the other half of the country does? And there's corruption on both sides, just like Dylan Ratigan said. So now everybody's trying to pretend corruption started in January 2017. So let me throw it back to you, Aaron. What would you like to do? Want to add anything?
Yeah, a few things. You know, the analogy that Kyle makes there is good, but in fact, it doesn't go far enough, because the one thing that distinguishes the Biden-Ukraine case is that Biden served in an administration that literally changed the Ukrainian government. The U.S. backed a coup in Ukraine in 2014 that kicked out Yanukovych. And after that, after the government was changed, that's when Biden came in and got that lucrative seat. Hunter Biden came in and got that lucrative seat on that board. And this was as Joe Biden himself was personally overseeing U.S. policy. I think it's important the jury is not out yet on whether or not this prosecutor that got fired was actually conducting a serious investigation of Hunter Biden's company. Speaking to Ukrainians who I consider informed, they were telling me that that prosecutor was indeed corrupt and was not, and that his investigation into Burisma, the company that Hunter Biden was on, was actually not going anywhere. And that, in fact, it was his firing that led to this investigation going somewhere. But that investigation did end in a settlement that made the investigation ultimately go away. So there's a bit, we can't assume that Biden helped shut down an investigation into his son's company. But what we can assume is, as you pointed out, he leveraged U.S. aid to get the prosecutor fired. And that is what Trump is being accused of now. But I will say, in fairness to Biden there, the one difference you could argue is that in this case, Trump is being accused of pressuring Ukraine to do something that's to his political advantage, whereas we don't know yet for sure if that's what Biden was doing in trying to get that prosecutor fired, or whether he was trying to protect his son. It certainly is quite possible, given the fact that his son was sitting on a board of a company that was being investigated. So and
it's obvious that his son is on that board because of crony capitalism, which comes from his father being the vice president of the United States when they overthrew the government. No,
exactly right. That's undoubtable, and it's laughable. I mean, exactly as Kyle Kalinske said. Imagine the reaction if one of Trump's kids had gotten a comparable board seat in Russia or anywhere. I mean, this would be like the smoking gun for all this corruption we constantly hear about. And the fact that Ted Lieu is now defending it it speaks to what the Democrats' priorities are.
So I want to show you how this was covered today in the Huffington Post. So the Huffington Post, this is what they had at their headline. They had, we got this transcript, and here's the headline, and they blacked out a lot of stuff, right? So I'll just read to you what they let you see. They printed the president, meaning Donald Trump. When it says the president, they mean Trump. So the president, I would like you to do us a favor, though. And then they black out the rest. Do you want to know go ahead. You want to see? I'm going to show you what they blacked out. You want to see what they blacked out? And I'll have Aaron comment on it. I would like to ask you to do us a favor, though, because our country has been through a lot and Ukraine knows a lot about it. I would like you to find out what happened with this whole situation with Ukraine. They say CrowdStrike. I guess you have one of your wealthy people, the server. They say Ukraine has it. There are a lot of things that went on, the whole situation. I think you're surrounding yourself with some of the same people. I would like to have the Attorney General call you or your people, and I would like you to get to the bottom of it. As you saw yesterday, that whole nonsense ended with a very poor performance by a man named Robert Mueller, an incompetent performance. But they say a lot of it started with Ukraine. Whatever you can do, it's very important that you do it if that's possible. So what he's saying here is that when the DNC server, when they claimed it was hacked by Russia, the FBI never inspected their server, which was highly irregular. And in fact, James Comey said he would have liked to have their server to investigate. They didn't. They let an outside company investigate their server called CrowdStrike. So the FBI never investigated the DNC server. And there were a lot of apologists who are Trump haters who said that didn't matter. They're 100,000% fucking wrong. Just like they were 100,000% wrong about Russiagate, they're 100,000% wrong about the DNC allowing a third party to do their investigation into foreign conspiracy and espionage. They let a private company do all their investigating for them. And this private company was called CrowdStrike. And now, Aaron, tell me about CrowdStrike.
Well, yeah, CrowdStrike is yet one more Democratic Party firm at the heart of Russiagate. So the collusion allegation, that comes from the Steele dossier that was paid for by the DNC. And it comes from a firm called Fusion GPS that was a DNC contractor. CrowdStrike is another DNC contractor, and they generated the Russian hacking allegation. And as you point out, the FBI never conducted an independent examination of the server. They just relied on CrowdStrike's reports. And when CrowdStrike even submitted some reports to the government recently had to admit that those reports were redacted. So the government itself could not even fully vet CrowdStrike's information because CrowdStrike took it upon itself to redact its own report and giving it to the government, which is then used by the government to make its case against Russia. So it's questionable. I don't know exactly what Trump is talking about here because he seems to imply that the DNC server is in Ukraine. Maybe he's saying that actually the Russian hack actually might have come from Ukraine. I don't know.
But the Ukraine CrowdStrike is owned by a Ukrainian oligarch. No.
Its president is a wealthy Russian. Who's very anti-Putin, and the CrowdStrike has famously had an incident in Ukraine.
Oh, that was it. Okay.
Where they accused the Russian GRU of carrying out a hack in Ukraine, and they accused the Russian GRU of using the same malware that they also accused Russia of using in the alleged DNC hack, email hack. Now, what's interesting is they had to retract that claim about Ukraine after it emerged that they were totally wrong, and so they had to retract their claim there, and that then raised the question: well, if they got it wrong here in this attribution of this GRU malware in Ukraine, are they possibly wrong as well in claiming that it happened in the DNC email theft? So maybe that's what Trump is talking about. I don't know. So I'd be curious to find out. But the critical point here, Jimmy, is that this is the first thing that Trump brings up to the Ukrainian president. And he's not asking him for help about Joe Biden. He's asking him to help with the investigation into the origins of Russiagate, which is currently going on. It's overseen by Attorney General William Barr and John Durham. he's asking for help there. And I think that is legitimate because Ukraine did play a role there. There's not just this CrowdStrike element, but there also is the fact that Ukrainians openly bragged about intervening in 2016.
Well, so this is majorly important. Now, I want everyone to listen to this point. In 2016, the Ukrainians bragged. What did they brag about?
They bragged about meddling in the 2016 election.
And in favor of who?
In favor of Hillary Clinton. I'll read you a quote. I'll read you a quote if I can pull it up, but I'll pull it up in a second. But yeah, so basically what happened was back in 2016, you had some Ukrainians who were anti-corruption campaigners, and they were very worried about Donald Trump's presidency. So let me read to you, Jimmy. This is a quote from the Financial Times in August 2016. And what happened that month is these Ukrainians handed over this ledger, supposedly showing millions of dollars in secret payments to Paul Manafort, who was then Trump's campaign manager. And the ledger was basically, it was handwritten notes purportedly showing that Manafort was paid all this money by Yanukovych, the Ukrainian president who Manafort worked for. But this ledger was never corroborated. It was basically just handwritten and with some signatures. But we never actually got concrete proof that this money was actually paid to Manafort. Not that Manafort was not corrupt. He totally was. But we don't know whether this specific ledger was real. But this ledger was given to U.S. media. It was published, and it led to Manafort's resignation after so many questions had been raised about his ties to Ukraine. And the Ukrainians openly bragged about that this was them meddling in the 2016 election. And they explained why. So the Ukrainian anti-corruption campaigner, his name was Sergei Lyshenko, who gave over the ledger. He said this: a Trump presidency would change the pro-Ukrainian agenda in American foreign policy. For me, it was important to show not only the corruption aspect, but that Trump is a pro-Russian candidate who can break the geopolitical balance in the world, unquote. And the Financial Times goes on to say, if the Republican candidate, Trump, loses in November, some observers suggest Kiev's actions may have played at least a small role. So back then, you have this open acknowledgement that Ukraine was interfering, providing dirt, if you will, for the purposes of impacting the outcome of the 2016 election. But there was no outcry then. I mean, imagine if you had Russian officials saying the exact same thing
about Hillary Clinton.
About Hillary Clinton, it would be outrage.
It would be. Why are they meddling in our elections, and we have to sanction them? Yeah.
So this is Trump. This is Trump asking the Ukrainian president to assist with the ongoing Durham review in an effort to find out what happened there, an effort to find out whether that ledger was real, for example, or whether that was actually fake in the same way that the Steele dossier was fake as well. Maybe the ledger actually was real. And if so, it'd be a good thing that we heard about it. But, for all this concern about accepting foreign assistance, if we apply that principle equally, it shouldn't just stop at what we accuse Russia of doing. It should also go to what Ukrainians openly bragged about doing.
So here's the headline from the Huffington Post. They say, I would like you to do us a favor, though. I will ask him to call you along with the Attorney General. Rudy very much knows what's happening, and he is a very capable guy. If you could speak to him, that would be great. There's a lot of talk about Biden's son, that Biden stopped the prosecution, and a lot of people want to find out about that. So whatever you can do with the Attorney General would be great. So that's what they're showing, and they're saying that proves that Trump is corrupt. Of course, they leave out all the CrowdStrike stuff and all that stuff that is actually very interesting. And their headline is, Trump pressured Ukraine to probe Biden while discussing military aid. Go ahead.
Jimmy, you know what? They also leave out the fact that it's the Ukrainian president who brings up Rudy Giuliani.
Yeah.
Like in that blacked out section, they're cutting out so much. They're making it look as if it's going from Trump saying, hey, do me a favor. It goes right to Biden.
Right.
But they're leaving out the CrowdStrike part and that actually Trump's first request is about helping with the investigation, the Russian investigation.
That's right.
Then they leave out the Ukrainian president himself bringing up the fact that Rudy Giuliani called, and that's when Trump talks to him about Joe Biden.
Yes. Here's how I want to show you how the Huffington Post is presenting this because it's kind of crazy. They go, the favor Trump requested from Zelensky was Zelensky's the Ukrainian president. The favor Trump requested from Zelensky was twofold. First, Trump asked Ukraine to investigate a conspiracy theory. That's how the Huffington Post, that's their words. Trump asked the Ukraine to investigate a conspiracy theory that the Democratic National Committee servers Russia hacked in 2016 to aid Trump's campaign were not actually hacked by Russia. They call that a conspiracy theory. The exact opposite is a conspiracy theory. The theory that Russia hacked into the DNC servers is what's called a conspiracy theory. Not buying into that is not a conspiracy theory. That means you don't believe a conspiracy theory. But Huffington Post is a propaganda outlet, and so that they're doing propaganda. That's what that is. It's not even technically correct to use that term. It's not a conspiracy theory to think that a conspiracy didn't happen, which is what Trump is asserting. He's saying that Russia didn't hack into the DNC servers. That's not a conspiracy theory, Huffington Post, and you know that. But they are corrupt, just as anybody, and they'll do propaganda. Am I right about that, Aaron? How do you feel about that phrasing?
I think the phrasing. Oh yeah, I agree with your criticism of the phrasing. Totally.
Thank you. Okay. So then they go on to say, moments later, Trump asked that Ukraine open an investigation into his potential 2020 rival, former Vice President Joe Biden, and Biden's son Hunter Biden. They leave out all the CrowdStrike stuff and the fact that Trump actually wanted to get to the bottom of who actually hacked the DNC server. That's really what he was asking. And if Trump thought Russia did it, if they did it, he would know, right? So why would Trump be asking the Ukraine to investigate it? That just shows you again, Russiagate is bullshit, because if it really was true, Trump would know it was true, and why would he bother asking someone else to investigate it? Does that make sense, Aaron?
Well, the only thing there is I don't want to give Trump's brain too much credit because he can convince himself of anything,
right,
to validate his own theories about the world. But it's certainly interesting that it signals that, look, it might be still an open question inside the administration. I mean, certainly Trump has been slow to endorse the intelligence communities, or the intelligence officials, I should say, not the whole community. So it's actually a very small group of intelligence officials who accuse Russia of the DNC email theft. Trump has been slow and reluctant to endorse that. And yes, it would certainly be great if actually that claim by the intelligence community, by intelligence officials, is being subjected to scrutiny because it deserves it. As we've talked about, the evidence for it that it's being presented to us is insufficient, and there are a lot of holes in it.
Now, Aaron, I want you to look. This is how the Huffington Post presents this. They show you this part of Trump. They go, I would like you to do us a favor, though, because our country has been through a lot, and Ukraine knows a lot about it, Trump said. Now, according to the Huffington Post, the key word in this response is though, because it implies a link between the president of the Ukraine, Zelensky's praise for U.S. military aid to the coming request. I think, I don't know, I'm going to go back to this. This seems like a huge stretch to me, but I'm going to ask the award-winning journalist, Aaron, can you comment on this?
Okay, so they're gonna try to claim that though is the smoking gun.
Yes.
No.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's funny, right? It's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, again, this is the kind of mentality that led to Russiagate, where this parsing of words and trying to interpret something damning and explosive when the actual evidence before us is just not there. And this is you've pulled up a really good illustration of that. So they're saying because Trump uses the word though, that means that he is extorting the Ukrainian president and conditioning U.S. military aid on Zelensky's full cooperation in investigating Joe Biden, something that Trump doesn't even explicitly say. He brings it up, certainly not even there, because in that passage he's talking about the origins of the Russia investigation. It's only way later on that Biden comes up, and even then it's not even clear what Trump is actually asking him to do. It looks like he's actually asking him just to cooperate with Attorney General William Barr,
right,
in a hypothetical investigation, because as we know, one doesn't even currently exist into Joe Biden and Ukraine, because Barr says it's not happening. So look, again, I want to stress this, that I do think that what Trump did was inappropriate.
Yes.
I don't think he should be asking a foreign leader to assist or to conduct whatever he did an investigation into a political rival.
Correct.
That's not his job.
Correct.
It's fine to investigate Joe Biden, but Trump should not be involved in it, and there shouldn't be even the hint that he is linking military aid to it. The problem is, though, if you want to prove that this is impeachable, you need evidence way more convincing than Trump's use of the word though. It's possible that that's actually what happened, but you need to prove it. You really do. And trying to focus on the word though and trying to use your imagination to think this is what happened, it's not enough. And so the whistleblower, we'll see what the complainant from the intelligence community has to offer. What we do know is that the complainant based their complaint on what they heard about the phone call. I think the whistleblower / complainant didn't even have the information we have now. We have the transcript now.
Yeah.
I don't think that there's no indication that the whistleblower even had the transcript. The whistleblower only had what they had heard from other White House officials, and it's possible they have something else. I don't know. We'll have to see.
So that's the thing about that. That's another part of this. So this whistleblower who blew the whistle that said Trump did this, he didn't even hear the conversation, didn't read the transcript. He heard about it from other people. That's correct, right?
Yes, that's exactly right.
So let's just finish this Huffington Post the way they present this, because it's ridiculous. They do say Trump first requested information from Zelensky related to the DNC server conspiracy theory. Do you understand why Trump gets to call them fake news? Do you understand why when he says they're fake news, it lands with half the country? And then they go on. The other thing Trump said, this is the second thing, there's a lot about Biden's son, that Biden stopped the persecution, and a lot of people want to find out about that. So whatever you can do with that attorney general would be great. And then Huffington Post said, Trump went on, per the summary, Biden went around bragging that he stopped the prosecution. So if you could look into it, it sounds horrible to me. He did brag that he stopped the prosecution. He did. Why I showed you the video. Whether he was bragging he stopped the prosecution of his kid or not, he did stop that prosecutor from doing his job. Adam Schiff says, he's the Democrat chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, said on Wednesday that those notes reflect is a classic mafia-like shakedown of a foreign leader. That's how a mafia boss talks. What have you done for us? We've done so much for you, but there isn't much reciprocity. That's exactly what Joe Biden did on that video. So Adam Schiff unwittingly indicting the Democratic frontrunner as a mafia-like guy when he deals with foreign policy. Would you agree with that?
I would, again, with the only possible caveat is that what Trump is suspected of doing here would have benefited him electorally in a way that it wouldn't have benefited Joe Biden if what Joe Biden did in shutting down the investigation is correct. So, I mean, both would be corrupt. If Trump asked for this favor and conditioned aid on it, that would benefit him electorally because it would weaken Joe Biden. But if Biden just shut down the investigation into his son by leveraging U.S. military aid, that would benefit his son. So it's there's a difference there in sort of what the corruption would be for. But in both cases, yeah, it is a similar act of leveraging aid to achieve a certain goal.
This is, again, so the whole idea that we all know he's not going to be impeached because you need the Senate he's not going to be kicked out of office. The House may vote to impeach him. I don't think they will, but the House may vote to impeach him. But just like with Bill Clinton, that doesn't mean he has to go out of office. They have to go to a trial then in the Senate. The Republicans own the Senate. That's not going to happen. So this is going to be what Nancy Pelosi said about George Bush being prosecuted or impeached, a waste of time. And this again will boost Trump. That's my theory. I can't be 1,000% sure, but I'm 999% sure that this is going to boost Trump, just like Russiagate boosted Trump. And the people pushing Russiagate, when you tell them that this actually helps Trump, they don't care. So this is an unhinged derangement syndrome where people are acting on 100% emotion and they're putting together any conspiracy in their head that they possibly can, and the walls are closing in. This is it. Remember, the walls are closing in on Trump. He's got, it's not happening. Trump is not going to be impeached over this. It's a waste of time. He gets to call the news media fake news. He gets to also highlight the corruption in Joe Biden and the Democratic Party and the DNC, and he's going to beat Joe Biden over the fucking head with this if they go head-to-head in the debate. This is a loser for the Democrats. The Democrats are trying to get Trump 2020 by doing this. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, in this respect, I think it's important to think about what the Democrats have brought us so far, and we should start with Russiagate. What was Russiagate for the Democrats, for the neoliberal wing of the Democrats? It was a way for them to avoid becoming the party of Bernie Sanders and his movement. That was the obvious lesson from 2016. You have Trump, a con man. I think he's a con man. Some people would disagree with that. Trump supporters would disagree with that. But I think at minimum, Trump portrayed himself as a working class champion, I think falsely. And he convinced enough people that he was anti-establishment. He was the anti-establishment candidate, and he won. So obviously that was the winning message in 2016. The obvious direction for Democrats to go in was with a real, authentic anti-establishment candidate who could then who could point to Trump and say, this guy promised to drain the swamp, but he's only enlarged it. He's enlarged it for himself and for his billionaire cabinet. And that the person with that message was, of course, the other anti-establishment candidate in 2016, who wasn't the nominee in the end, but who came close, which is Bernie Sanders. And so that would be the obvious direction for Democrats to go in after 2016. And the obvious move would be to drop and abandon finally the neoliberal legacy that enough voters rejected by electing Trump. But they didn't go that way, and they didn't go in the direction of changing their policies, because doing so would threaten their own privilege and power. So instead, they latched onto this theory that Russia was the reason for Trump's victory and that Trump might have been a conspirator in this grand coup that Russia pulled off. And so fixating on this for over 2 years was their way to deflect responsibility and to hold on to their own power. And this Ukraine gate thing now, I think, follows from that similar poison tree. Because blaming Russia also then fuels this militaristic, jingoistic posture towards Russia, where the way to resist Trump is now to accuse them of being soft on Moscow. And it also requires venerating and, in fact, relying on intelligence officials. So Robert Mueller is going to be our savior. And the word of John Brennan, now that he's an analyst on MSNBC, is the word of God. We have to listen to him and believe him when he tells us that the walls are closing in. Well, look how that turned out. It was a complete disaster. But look at the lessons that are being learned. Nothing. Because what is this Ukraine gate scandal now? It's the same thing. Trump held up briefly this military aid to Ukraine. Adam Schiff today comes on TV and he says Trump weakened Ukraine's ability to fight back Russian aggression, and that hurt our national security. And who is the hero now in this new Ukraine gate thing? It's another member of the intelligence community. Another person who is coming at Trump, not because they don't like him bombing Yemen and starving Yemen and, being cruel to immigrants and discriminating against poor people and working class people in this country, robbing from working class people in this country, but because they don't like the fact that Trump held up briefly military aid to Ukraine. So it's the same thing in a refusal to be a real opposition party and challenge Trump on his actual policies, instead relying on intelligence officials and rallying behind the flag and being the party of militarism and Cold War chauvinism that we're seeing now in Ukraine gate. So how can anybody who is progressive and who actually wants to take Trump down, based on the experience of Russiagate alone, get behind this? And as you say, it's emotions are getting the better of people. And I get it, I understand it, but it's just not smart.
Boy, that is the understatement of the last 4 years, that emotions are getting the better part of some people. Boy, if that's all it was, we'd be okay. If that's all it was, we'd be okay. But again, even YouTubers, right, who are today are just breathlessly sound exactly like MSNBC and CNN, reporting this exactly the same way CNN and MSNBC reports it. And they have to come to shows like this and to people like a Gray Zone and Aaron Matei to get the actual full picture of what's actually going on. And I was just telling Steph the other day, you know, I used to get worried about like, wow, what's going to happen with my show? And I don't know. They're never going to stop sucking. They're never going to stop sucking. They're never going to stop sucking. Huffington Post will never stop sucking. CNN, MSNBC, half of the progressive YouTube is never going to stop sucking. They leave a huge lane open for us, Aaron. They leave a huge lane open for guys like you and me and Max Blumenthal and Kyle Kalinske. There's a huge lane open for us. And I say thank you to those guys because they can't do a shitty enough job covering Trump. If you want to know about what's actually happening in the country, you can't turn on MSNBC, CNN, or half the progressive YouTube because they have a fucking emotional derangement syndrome and it is attached to Donald Trump and they can't see clearly and they're going to lose again. We're going to get Donald Trump again. They keep doing this shit. Again, you people screaming at the top of their lungs about this very bullshit issue instead of screaming about what Trump is doing in Yemen. Isn't that kind of amazing that we have a real war crime happening? Well, we're assisting a theocratic, brutal dictatorship in committing a genocide over again, oil once again in Yemen. No one's saying a goddamn thing about it. Nancy Pelosi isn't screaming about it. Chuck Schumer, Michael Moore isn't screaming about it. Everybody's screaming about impeach him over this. It's ridiculous. It makes me again happy not to be a member of the Democratic Party or in the journalism club. It makes me feel great that I'm not in that fucked up corporate herd mentality bullshit profession filled with sycophantic climbers. That's all it is. And I'm doing a much better job than the Washington Post, the New York Times. I'm doing a much better job than fake tough guy Lawrence O'Donnell and Rachel Maddow and miserable Chris Hayes. I know he's miserable. I know all that money and he's still fucking chain smoking and fucking drinking his head off. I know he's miserable, and he would love to be doing what I'm doing, but he doesn't have the balls. And here I am doing it, and Aaron Matei's got the balls. He doesn't give a fuck how many people shit on him and smeared him and called him names. He went ahead and did great reporting, and he won a fucking award for it. That's what we give you here. You're not going to get it pretty much anywhere else, except maybe the Gray Zone. And every once in a while, The Nation publishes Aaron Matei, but that's about it.
You know, speaking of Lawrence O'Donnell, I mean, just a few weeks ago, he was claiming that Russian oligarchs co-signed Trump's bank loans. Remember that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it's like this is it comes from the same thing. It's the same kind of behavior. And you know, I've said this before on your show. We've talked about it. We're going to look back on this presidency as the time when, under this administration, for all of its corruption and all the crimes it's committed in this country and around the world, that the resistance focused on trying to prove a conspiracy theory, and that some of its biggest protests, bigger than protest over the tax cuts that saw a massive upward transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich, bigger than any protests over that were protests over the firing of Jeff Sessions. That's where our priorities were. It became the party of of Cold War bureaucrats, basically, and trying to protect the job security of Robert Mueller, even though it was never really in serious jeopardy. It's just, it's so tragic, and now it's getting serious because that meant we've learned nothing from Russiagate apparently, and now we're heading into the primary, and we're making this now again front and center instead of a real primary where policies and issues can be front and center. I mean, it's fine. I really get that all this stuff really excites people who go on MSNBC. If you look at their show, or if you look at their network, there are no working, like analysts talking about labor rights and healthcare. It's all intelligence community analysts and legal scholars who are all just. This is like a wet dream for them. It's all so exciting because they can talk about the different statutes and intelligence community speak, and they can all pretend they're uncovering some grand sinister plot to bring down the president, just like they pretended for 2+ years they were doing that with Russiagate. But meanwhile, there's a real country out there where people are looking at all this and saying, and looking at issues that have nothing to do with people's actual lives and their livelihoods, and the material well-being, and is again fixated on trying to extract from even vague information something explosive. You look at this transcript. Yeah, it's inappropriate. Trump brings up Biden, but he's not. You have to really sort of like strain to pull from this that he's extorting the government of Ukraine and conditioning aid to it on Ukraine following his orders. That is just not there in that transcript. So it's engaged in more fantasy talk. And for anybody who's engaged in reality, the reality of their lives outside of Washington, it's just not going to fly.
All right. Well, Aaron, thank you so much. Everybody check out Aaron's work at the I wanted to have you on. I missed covering this story, but I wanted to cover when I do, I'll ask you to come back on. But the Inspector General released a report about James Comey. And correct me if I'm wrong, Aaron, I could be wrong about this, but the Inspector General concluded that James Comey was a huge lying piece of shit. Am I right about that?
Yeah, he certainly said that Comey misled and that he acted and he details how Comey acted in a really shady way. And he unfortunately helps confirm some of the worst fears of the Trump crowd and talking about an effort by intelligence officials to undermine the elected president.
Yes.
Basically, it's a long story, but when Trump was briefed on the Steele dossier, it's obvious from the way Horowitz, the Inspector General, writes about it, that Comey was not just there to brief Trump about this thing that they heard about, but to try to get information from Trump that Comey could then use for their bullshit Russia investigation. So it's like all the conspiracy, all the paranoia of right-wingers talk over the years that there is this deep state of unelected bureaucrats trying to bring them down. That was actually given some credence by the actions of intelligence officials who just went way out of line when it came to their conduct of the Russia investigation. And Comey is an example of that. It's so bizarre. And again,
well, there are text messages from like deputy FBI director saying we're going to stop Trump from being president, right?
Yeah, there are, and it's like, as people who don't want to see Trump reelected, we could say, all right, well, we don't want to see Trump reelected. But we also don't agree in unelected intelligence officials abusing their power to undermine an election. We actually want to defeat Trump at the ballot box and by coming up with better policies. The problem is, as we talked about, Democratic leadership doesn't really care about developing a policy alternative. They also support this insane for-profit healthcare system that we have right now. So they'd rather rely on intelligence officials and venerate them and have them do the job. And it's just not going to work. And it's failed so far with Russiagate. I agree with you. I think it will fail again with Ukraine Gate now, but we'll see. We'll never know what happens. I just think we're. Yeah.
A lot of people would say, "So what, Jimmy? So what? If you were at the FBI, wouldn't you try to stop Trump? Wouldn't you try to?" No, I wouldn't go against my constitutional sworn oath. No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't do that. And the reason why you want to make a big deal out of this is because the FBI does this to progressive candidates way more than they do it to conservative candidates. In fact, I have a videotape I played on this show of the former deputy director of the FBI admitting that when he came to the FBI, that used to be their job to make sure progressive politicians didn't get into power. And how did they do it? By smear campaigns, putting fake articles in the paper, using their connections to smear the. That's how they did do this stuff. And so I don't want an unelected FBI agent or CIA agent doing that kind of determining who's going to be in elected office, whether it's Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump, or anybody in the middle. I don't want unelected intelligence officers having that kind of power. And when they do exercise that, they should be fired and jailed for treason. Okay, I guess that's it.
Hey, can
Jimmy,
I say? Go ahead. I just have 3 comics for Aaron.
Really quickly. We have. Do you have to go because we have a
just
question?
3 comics. Dominic says Aaron Matei is one of the world's best journalists. Just so you know, Sets.
Thank you.
Sets wants you to play the piano for us later, and then at the very beginning, an hour ago, one person wanted to know how do you maintain. Zippity Day wants to know how do you maintain your easygoing laugh when you're attacked all day on Twitter, and this is a serious question. How do you keep your sanity?
Because it's just Twitter. Who cares? Who cares? Just Twitter. I don't know, Jimmy. How do you feel about that?
I just add another blood pressure medicine. That's all I do. Okay. Yeah. Tell your parents I said hello. I'll talk to you later. Thanks for coming on. Everybody check out Aaron Matei at The Gray Zone. All right.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Aaron.
Bye.
Hey everybody, we're doing a live show every Sunday in October in Hollywood, California at the Sycamore Tavern. Go to jimmydorcomedy.com for a link for tickets and become a patron. We give you hours of bonus material every month. Become a premium member. Go to jimmydorcomedy.com and sign up. Thanks for your support.